Okay, let's talk about resignations. I've talked before in other videos about the etiquette of resigning, and a very noticeable thing with people coming new to board games as adults, especially in the last 20 years when that's really increased in numbers, is that a lot of those people do not understand the etiquette or the reasons behind resignations. So they either whinge about people resigning in the right places, or they resign themselves in the wrong places. There are two very large group of games where resigning is very unusual. Those are miniature war games and multiplayer board games. Memoir 44 is not a miniatures war game, and resignations should actually be very common in match play. They won't happen very much in friendly play, where you're just playing individual games, but they should be very common in match play. And understanding why resignations are rare in those other two types of games is all useful because it sets up a better understanding of the tactical importance of the end game in Memoir 44. In multiplayer games, resignations are unusual because your resignation will affect the relative standing of the other players. In a two-player game, if you resign, the other person wins. And that's fine. One person winning is a perfectly reasonable conclusion to the game. But even if you've lost in a multiplayer game, your resignation could decide who comes first and who comes second. So you're changing the winner by your resignation, and therefore it's good manners to play out the game in order for the other players to work out their relative orders. Resignations are also quite rare in miniature war games, but those are two-player, or at least they generally involve two sides. And so the reason that resignations are rare there are really quite different, and it's to do with dice. Miniature war games tend to be very random. They are right on the other extreme from multiplayer board games, lots of unmitigated independent probabilities. For perfectly logical reasons. The people playing them want to spend a large amount of time on the modelling. Player skill is highly variable and tends to be towards the lower end in wargames clubs, which, again, makes sense. If you wanted a battle of wits with another human being, you'd be playing a game of chess, not a miniature wargame. Lots of randomness gives weak players a chance against strong players. And generally, it almost always gives them a chance. For example, I've played a bit of Kings of War, and that has a fairly distinct endgame, where you can usually plot out the final moves in almost exactly the same way you can in a game of chess. Sometimes one side does have a clearly won position, and you can call it on turn 5. But usually, when you do that, you realise that there's some set of key dice rolls that the result is going to hinge on. And sometimes they are outrageous dice rolls. Somebody would need to roll a double 6, and then a double 6 again, which is like 1 in 1296. But the point is that they still have a chance of winning, even against their opponent's best play. And that's the point. Resignation is an acceptance that you can no longer win. In some games, that involves a recognition or an acknowledgement or simply the courtesy of saying to your opponent that you don't believe they're capable of making a move so egregiously bad it would actually allow you an opportunity to win, which, is perfectly fair. The opponent can actually make a move bad enough to lose it. It's just that you assume that having got to this position, they're not going to. That's the etiquette element. And generally speaking, in miniatures wargames, those kinds of situations don't arise. Again, because of the dice rolls. There's just levels of luck in the dice rolls against which no strategy is effective. But Memoir 44 is not a miniatures game. It's a board game with fancy counters. And importantly, there are very often situations in which you cannot win. This is one of them. This position here is lost for the Axis player, and that might come as a surprise. Positionally, the Soviets don't look too great, and the casualties are fairly even, 3 Axis to 2 Soviets, but I'm withholding a bit of information from you. This is the second half of a match, in which I won the first round. You can see the game statistics at any time by clicking on the clipboard symbol on the top right on the Board Game Arena interface. A match of Memoir 44 consists of 2 games in which you play both sides in a scenario. If you win with both sides, you win the match. If you lose with both sides, you lose the match. But if you and your opponent both win 1 game, it comes down to a tiebreaker. The first tiebreaker, by far the most common, is the number of medals. And if those are equal, the number of opposing figures eliminated. In this case, the total number of medals needed is 6 for each game in the scenario, and I won the first leg, so I have 6 medals already racked up. In that first game, my opponent only got 2 medals, which means that the most my opponent can get in total is 8, 6 for winning the second game, and the 2 they already have for the first game. Note, a game always ends immediately when you have the number of medals required, so there is no way to score more than 6. And I've already racked up 3 medals in this game, so there is simply no point in continuing. I'm always going to win. And you can absolutely finish out a game if you want to, especially if it's your first time on a scenario. I'm a big advocate for players doing that in, say, Unconditional Surrender, which I do a lot of videos about, partly because the end game there is very, very complex and players often misjudge whether a position is winnable or losable, partly because in a lot of games it's just useful to understand why a particular position is lost. Though in Memoir 44, it's not very hard to explain that it's just physically impossible for you to get enough points to win. But the point here isn't that I'm telling you must resign, but rather trying to get across that learning to tell when a game is lost and resign will make you more aware of the tiebreakers, and the tiebreakers are important. I've literally seen players lose a match because they killed an enemy unit, gaining a medal and ending the game, but they did so at a point when they had eliminated fewer enemy figures than their opponent, and the medal count would be equal. So the action they took literally lost them the game. Learning to resign lost positions makes you more aware of the victory conditions, and that is a key element getting better at Memoir 44. Sometimes you're going to have close matches, and if you are paying attention to the tiebreaker and your opponent is not, maybe you will edge out 1 or 2 of them. In this match, my strategy in the second game was affected by the degree of my win in the first game. I basically ignored any terrain objective, you can lose those medals back to the opponent, and concentrated my efforts on killing 3 units, because the moment I did that, I knew I would win. That's the point. Unwinnable positions are quite common in Memoir 44, and if you learn to identify them and resign when you see them, you won't just have more time to play more games, you'll develop with it a better appreciation of the endgame and a stronger awareness of the tiebreakers. So here endeth the lesson. Just a short one today. After my first flurry with Memoir 44, I'm playing in the arena on board game on BGA at the moment, so there might be some more content on this and perhaps a little deeper than today's.